The gavel cracked like lightning through the chamber, and in the silence that followed, Lindsey Graham leaned back with a smirk that sliced sharper than steel. His words, laced with arrogance, had just reduced the debate to a performance. His performance. "Some of us actually earned our seats here," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. The insult hovered in the air like smoke after an explosion. The chamber froze. Eyes darted. Some lawmakers stifled uneasy grins, while others shifted in their seats as though the insult had struck them too. Cameras panned across the room, capturing the flicker of amusement in his allies, the discomfort in those who knew the line had crossed the threshold. The silence cracked like glass. Every camera froze on her face. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat still, her expression unreadable, her posture composed. She did not flinch, did not fire back immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Whispers turned into thunder at the chamber's edges, reporters scribbling, aides exchanging glances, the audience sensing the weight of a moment that felt more like a trial than a debate. Graham leaned forward slightly, savoring the pause as if certain he had won before the match had even begun. The smirk deepened. His confidence filled the room, thick and suffocating. For him, this was the closing argument. For her, it was only the opening statement. Her silence became its own weapon. The absence of response was louder than any outburst, a sharp contrast to his sneer. Dignity stood against arrogance, and the balance began to shift in ways he could not yet see. The chamber, once tilted toward mockery, started to lean toward anticipation. Then she inhaled, a simple breath, but in the stillness it sounded like the prelude to a storm. All eyes locked on her, the tension pulling tighter with every heartbeat. But what no one expected was how fast the tables would turn. The laughter echoed, not with humor, but with cruelty. It rolled across the chamber in waves, a sound less like amusement and more like the confirmation of a hierarchy. Lindsey Graham had struck his line, sharp and cutting, and now the echo was his chorus. The chamber tilted toward him, as though gravity itself obeyed seniority. He leaned back in his chair, voice curling with practiced authority. "Reckless passion may win headlines, but it doesn't write laws that stand the test of time." His words, heavy with condescension, landed like stones hurled from a fortress wall. Each syllable reminded the room of his tenure, his decades of experience, his grip on procedure. To him, the debate was not about policy. It was about reminding the chamber who belonged and who did not. Eyes darted like searchlights. Some faces glowed with approval, pleased to see a junior member diminished. Others turned uneasy, unwilling to share in the spectacle but powerless to resist its momentum. The insult became a dividing line. Those who laughed became complicit, those who stayed silent bore the weight of cowardice. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat still, the target of the spectacle, her presence framed as reckless energy against his supposed wisdom. The imbalance was palpable, a veteran versus a newcomer, a gatekeeper versus an outsider. To many watching, it looked like an ambush disguised as a lesson. But beneath the theater was something larger. The debate itself was about accountability, about who should wield power and how that power should be held to account. Graham, with his smirk and seasoned dismissal, wasn't merely mocking her, he was attempting to define legitimacy. If he could brand her as reckless, inexperienced, unworthy, then her words, her arguments, even her presence could be diminished. Every word struck like a stone. The chamber absorbed his mockery, each insult adding to the weight pressing against her silence. He wielded procedure and tradition like weapons, cloaking mockery in the language of order. To him, accountability meant control. To her, accountability meant truth. The air thickened. Suspense hung over the chamber, the imbalance sharp enough to wound. Some feared she might be cornered, unable to match the sneer of a seasoned opponent with the same venom. Yet in that fear there was also hope, a belief that her composure, her silence, her poise might hold the seeds of reversal. Graham's smirk lingered as if he had already secured victory. But victory claimed too soon is fragile. The chamber waited, restless, uncertain, leaning toward the gatekeeper but sensing the undercurrent that threatened him. And yet, The most dangerous blow was not the insult, it was the history behind it. For decades, Lindsey Graham perfected the art of the smirk, using it like a weapon sharper than any law book. It was his shield and his sword, the expression he wore when dismissing rivals, silencing critics, or reducing a heated debate to a stage for his own performance. In the chamber, it was more than a smile. It was a signal that he had the upper hand, that experience would always outweigh challenge, that his voice carried the authority of time itself. The record played like a warning siren. His career stretched back through battles where he emerged not because of persuasion, but because of ridicule. He could turn a moment of vulnerability into a punchline, and an opponent's mistake into a scar that would never fade. His allies praised him as a fighter. His critics saw a man addicted to dismissal. And over time, this became his brand, the smirk that said, "You don't belong here." But the story was not one of consistency. Each reversal was a crack in the armor. He shifted alliances, bending with political winds when it suited him. The words he once declared immutable seemed to melt under pressure when power demanded it. Outrage rose from both sides of the aisle, not because he fought with conviction, but because conviction seemed optional. His critics accused him of hypocrisy. His defenders called it pragmatism. Either way, the pattern became clear. The smirk was not born of certainty, but of survival. Still, survival has its cost. His habit of underestimating opponents grew sharper with each victory. He began to believe that mockery was invincible, that belittling a rival was the same as defeating them. He could dismiss their passion as reckless, their logic as naive, their presence as unearned. For years, this tactic worked. Time after time, the chamber tilted toward him, drawn not by truth but by the weight of his dismissals. Yet, arrogance carries within it the seed of downfall. His smirk masked a history of contradictions. Each crack widened, and beneath the facade of mastery lay the possibility of exposure. Rivals who studied him closely began to see the pattern. When challenged with calm clarity, when stripped of laughter and applause, the smirk faltered. Without the power of mockery, his voice carried less thunder than he imagined. The flashbacks of his career read less like triumphs and more like rehearsals for the same act, repeated endlessly. He had mocked before. He had dismissed before. He had underestimated before. But repetition breeds complacency, and complacency blinds. In the chamber now, when he leaned back with that same smirk, he believed the script would play out as it always had. A sharp line, a chorus of laughter, a rival silenced. Yet this time, the rival was different. This time, the silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. But arrogance has one fatal flaw. It blinds you to the counterstrike you never see coming. Long before the smirks and insults, she was behind a bar, listening, watching, sharpening her understanding of people and power. The clink of glasses, the hum of conversation, the late-night confessions of strangers. It was there that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez absorbed the unfiltered realities of ordinary lives. She learned how people revealed themselves in fragments, how to read gestures, when to press and when to stay silent. What others dismissed as unremarkable work became her apprenticeship in human nature. Her journey felt like a fuse burning toward the present moment. From those nights of labor, she carried not only endurance but perspective, an understanding that dignity does not come from titles, but from service. When she stepped into politics, few saw her coming. The establishment looked at her youth, her lack of pedigree, and assumed she would fade. Yet each dismissal only sharpened her resolve. She was underestimated before. In her first campaign, she was labeled an outsider, too inexperienced to challenge entrenched power. Commentators smirked, opponents waved her away as symbolic. But the so-called outsider listened harder, worked longer, and spoke with a clarity that pierced through cynicism. The shock of her victory rippled like a thunderclap, a reminder that passion tethered to principle could upset the most comfortable calculations. Inside Congress, the pattern repeated. Every smirk, every attempt to sideline her as too young or too reckless, became fuel. She absorbed it, transformed it, and returned sharper. Her intellect, often caricatured as passion without depth, revealed itself in meticulous preparation, incisive questioning, and relentless focus. Each hearing became an arena where she dismantled assumptions, where her opponent's underestimation became their weakness. But the rise was not just about defiance. It was also about moral clarity. She carried into the chamber the voices of the neighborhood she served, the working class, the overlooked, the invisible. Her speeches drew not only on policy but on lived experience, weaving dignity with urgency. Admirers saw not a symbol, but a fighter who understood the stakes personally. The silence around her now was the weight of history. Every insult Graham hurled, every dismissive laugh, echoed the same underestimation she had faced at every stage. She knew the pattern well: arrogance masks insecurity, dismissal conceals fear. The chamber might tilt toward the veteran now, but she had seen tides turn before. Her resilience was her armor. Her intellect was her weapon. And her composure, that pause, that refusal to be baited, was the signal that she was not merely surviving the insult. She was waiting for the precise moment when silence would transform into fire. The journey that began behind a bar was no accident. It was training in patience, in observation, in knowing when to strike. Those nights of listening became mornings of organizing, campaigns against the impossible, victories that reshaped the narrative of who could lead. Each chapter made the next confrontation inevitable. Each underestimation carved the shape of her strength. And now, in the chamber, every lesson from that journey would ignite like fire. The interruptions came like knives, fast, cutting, meant to wound before she could finish. Graham's voice, sharp and practiced, sliced across hers with the precision of a man convinced the floor belonged to him. "You don't understand how this works," he barked, leaning forward as though proximity gave him authority. Each time she began to build her point, he struck again, drowning her words in the weight of his own interruptions. Every pause was a battlefield. She chose not to fight the noise with noise but with patience. Her tone remained steady, her cadence deliberate. Where his words rushed, hers slowed, gathering weight. Each syllable became a stone laid carefully, one after another, building something solid while he swung wildly at the air. The chamber noticed. The smirk faltered for the first time. Outrage simmered at the edges. Some faces turned away, uneasy at the imbalance. Others leaned closer, eager to see her pushed into silence. But silence was not defeat, it was preparation. She allowed the interruptions to crash against her like waves, steadying herself against their rhythm until the tide began to weaken. Admiration began to flicker among her allies. They saw the strategy: composure against arrogance, calm against chaos. A few leaned forward, nodding almost imperceptibly, their body language signaling support. The weight of the chamber started to shift, the imbalance no longer as secure as Graham believed. Her words grew sharper with each attempt. "I'll continue when you're finished interrupting me," she said, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. Laughter rippled faintly, not cruel this time, but astonished. The chamber leaned forward, sensing the shift. Graham pressed harder, his sneers growing less controlled. What began as confidence edged toward desperation, each interruption a little louder, a little less precise. His weapon of arrogance was losing its shine, dulled by repetition. And against that dullness, her precision cut deeper. Suspense swelled. Would she unleash the strike now? Or was this still the setup, the slow tightening of the coil before release? Every camera fixed on her, waiting, expecting. Allies exchanged glances. Something was building. And then, in one sentence, she shifted the entire balance of power. Her voice cut through the chamber like a bell, clear, commanding, impossible to dismiss. The interruptions ceased, not because Graham had yielded, but because her tone forced silence. It was the kind of voice that made the walls listen, a sound that demanded presence, and left no room for dismissal. She began with precision, laying the groundwork stone by stone. If experience is the measure of truth, then why has experience so often failed the American people? Each word landed like a verdict. She did not attack the man across from her, she dismantled the pedestal he stood on. Graham smirked again, but the edges of it were trembling. He tried to interject, but the chamber's focus was no longer his to command. Even allies who once chuckled at his barbs sat frozen, eyes fixed on the young congresswoman whose composure had transformed into fire. Her rebuttal unfurled in waves. She pointed to hypocrisy, to the shifting allegiances that had made his career infamous. She reminded the chamber, and the nation beyond, that power without principle corrodes law itself. You call me reckless for questioning abuse of power. I call it my duty. That is the oath I swore, the oath you swore, and the oath the people expect us to keep. The chamber erupted like a storm. Gasps overlapped with applause, the sound breaking the formality of the hall. Even those who opposed her could not deny the sharpness of her logic, the clarity of her words. Graham leaned back, attempting composure, but the rhythm had shifted beyond his reach. His attempts at dismissal were drowned beneath the resonance of her rebuttal. Every line she delivered drew strength from the silence that followed, each pause a reminder of the gravity of what she had just spoken. Admiration swelled. Allies smiled openly now, tapping desks, whispering in tones of awe. Her dignity burned through every syllable, not the wild anger of someone cornered, but the steady fire of someone who had endured dismissal before and turned it into strength. Then came the strike that shattered arrogance. Power doesn't make you right. Truth does. And if you cannot stand on truth, then your power is nothing but borrowed time. Shock rippled across the chamber. Graham's face stiffened, the mask of control cracking for all to see. Online, clips of the exchange were already spreading, hashtags igniting like wildfire, hashtag rule of law, hashtag AOC vs Graham, hashtag dignity wins. Within minutes, the nation's digital stage mirrored the chamber's storm. Catharsis filled the room. Every insult, every smirk, every attempt to drown her voice now inverted itself into fuel for her triumph. The imbalance was gone. Where once she appeared cornered, she now stood as the immovable center, her words echoing with the weight of history. Hope surged, not just for her, but for what she represented, that dignity could prevail against arrogance, that clarity could outlast noise. The chamber had been tilted toward Graham, now it tilted toward her. And as she delivered her final line, the silence before it stretched like a hell breath. History will not remember the smirk. It will remember the truth. The chamber erupted once more, a storm now uncontainable. Graham's hand tightened around his notes, his voice lost beneath the roar. But the shockwaves had only just begun. Within minutes, the chamber was no longer the battleground, the entire nation was. Screens across the country lit up, replaying the clash in endless loops, every pause magnified, every line dissected. The smirk that once mocked had vanished, replaced by a silence that told its own story. Headlines ignited like sparks catching dry grass. Crockett's calm fury dismantles Graham. Power meets its match in dignity. Every headline carried her words, her tone, her unwavering calm against the tide of arrogance. Allies cheered, opponents scrambled for cover, and pundits spoke of a shift that could not be undone. Social media turned the exchange into a storm. Hashtags surged, hashtag rule of law, hashtag dignity wins, hashtag mic drop moment. Viral edits paired her lines with cinematic soundtracks, the chamber erupting in applause timed to thunderclaps. One clip, slowed to half speed, captured the exact moment Graham's smirk faltered, the mask slipping, a 3-second loop shared millions of times. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it was damning. Inside the chamber, the air was still heavy with the echo of her words. Lawmakers who once smirked alongside Graham now avoided his gaze. The laughter that had mocked her earlier was gone, replaced by the uneasy quiet of recognition. She had not just answered him, she had eclipsed him. Graham shifted papers, forced a cough, pretended composure, but his silence screamed louder than any insult. The man who had styled himself as gatekeeper now sat like a relic, his power diminished not by shouting, but by the clarity of her truth. For AOC, the victory was more than a rebuttal. It was legitimacy made visible. Every slight, every dismissal, every accusation of inexperience burned away in the heat of that moment. She had spoken not only for herself, but for every voice dismissed as Unqualified. Across living rooms, cafes, and phones glowing in the dark, viewers leaned closer, some with pride swelling, others with disbelief tightening in their chests. Admirers called it her finest hour. Critics scrambled for talking points, yet even they could not ignore the resonance of her words. Dignity had spoken, and arrogance had fallen silent. The shockwaves rolled outward, unstoppable. Supporters posted messages of vindication, journalists framed the clash as a turning point, and young activists clipped her final line into a rallying cry. The smirk that once mocked had become the symbol of defeat, erased by the fire of her clarity. And yet in the silence that followed, one lesson remained. In the end, it wasn't volume that carried the day, it was dignity. The chamber, once a stage for mockery and smirks, had been transformed by the steady force of calm resolve. Silence carried more weight than thunder. Every gesture, every measured word, became a testament to the power of composure and clarity. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had faced ridicule, interruption, and dismissal, yet she emerged not with fury, but with unwavering principle. Truth stood taller than arrogance, cutting through the noise of ego and entitlement. Her words lingered like a verdict, not just for Graham or the chamber, but for anyone watching who had ever been underestimated, undervalued, or dismissed. It was a victory that transcended politics. Dignity, when wielded deliberately, had outlasted the sharpest mockery. The lesson was simple but profound. The measure of power is not in who shouts the loudest, but in who can hold fast to integrity while the world tests them. Her triumph resonated far beyond the walls of the chamber. People watching saw more than a rebuttal, they saw a model of resilience. Admirers felt pride swell in their chests, inspired to confront their own moments of doubt with courage. The audience recognized that underestimation, when met with preparation and clarity, could be transformed into strength. Even those who disagreed with her policy found themselves compelled to respect the precision of her logic, the unwavering calm of her demeanor, and the moral clarity that defined her actions. The applause that erupted was not simply for her victory over a single adversary, but for the affirmation that dignity could prevail in the face of arrogance. This was more than a debate. It was a lesson for anyone who had ever been mocked for ambition, belittled for voice, or silenced by cynicism. Her rise, her calm in the storm, and her precise dismantling of arrogance offered proof that courage combined with principle can reshape any arena. The chamber, now quiet, carried the echoes of her words. Each pause, each moment of reflection, was a reminder that moral clarity is unstoppable when nurtured. Her example lingered, a beacon for those who might next face doubt or dismissal. And for those watching, one question lingered: what comes next? The gavel may have fallen, but the story is far from over. The chamber's silence echoes outward, carrying the weight of what was witnessed and the lessons it leaves behind. Every ending is a beginning, and every observer becomes part of the unfolding narrative. For those who watched, reflection is inevitable. What does it mean to stand firm against dismissal? To meet arrogance with clarity and patience? The chamber showed that dignity is not passive, it is active, deliberate, and transformative. Now the verdict rests with you. Will you carry the lessons forward? Will you amplify the voice of truth, share the story, and uphold the principle that respect and integrity triumph over mockery and power plays? Join the conversation. Share the moment that shook a chamber and inspired a nation. Subscribe, stay engaged, and bear witness to the moments when courage, logic, and dignity shape history. The story continues, and every action matters.